for Oops. Thank you, Jen. Today is the March synchronous webinar for the Rural CCMR Accelerator Program Data Leads. So today we'll be providing really a high-level overview of the program, as well as really get into some data capacity building. So first, we want to say congratulations and welcome to the Rural CCMR Data Fellowship. We're so excited to have you here and to be talking all things data and really be able to be boosting your CCMR outcomes based on data. So first, we want to do just some introductions of the Maya data team. And this is who you will be seeing our faces a lot throughout the Data Fellowship. So to start, my name is Alex Koltmowski, and I'm a senior consultant here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Craver. I'm a principal consultant here at Maya on the data team. Excited to be working with you all.
Tech consultant here. I'm in the data team at Maya, and I look forward to working with you guys.
Awesome. And if you have any questions throughout the program, you can reach out to any three of us related to all things data. We're also lucky enough to have both Kathy and Marshall from the coaching side of the house here joining us today as well. And they are your go-tos for all things like program related needs. So we're happy to have them joining us today as well.
Thanks, Alex. Everybody knows I always mess these webinars up. They have a great plan, I'm sure. I always jump in, tell a joke, mess things up. I'm Marshall. I'm the Vice President of Post-Secondary Programs at Maya, but more importantly, I'm a rural kid. I went to school at a school with 43 of my best friends, right on the panhandle of Texas. Rural is my passion. That's why our team, our team just has such a passion for helping rural school districts. You guys are incredibly gritty. You do a lot with sometimes not a whole lot. You do incredible things for kids, and it's just really fun for us to work with rural, especially for me coming from a rural school. I just want to say this is a change from the previous cohort. And the thing that we realized is data is so important to the continuous improvement. Like getting good results in CCMR requires really knowing your data, but everyone kept asking everyone for data, but no one ever helped you learn how to get all these files. No one ever supported you in how to upload or pivot a table or download a CSV or build a visualization. We kept finding that everybody was asking for things, but no one was ever really helping you navigate all of this data work. So this data team at Maya is incredible, and I'm so excited that this not only require trying to input data, but then helping get that done. So I'm really excited for this to kick off, and I'm so appreciative of their work. I will just say throughout the entire data process, I hope you guys realize that you're in charge. And I want you to make sure you tell us what you need. If you're doing something because of us, that's wrong. You should be telling us what you need. And Alex and Jen and Nafki are so responsive. So make sure this is not busy work. Come off mute. Tell us to shut up. Tell us, I need this right now. Our goal is to help. So make sure that we want you to know we're not in charge, you're in charge. And we want you to ask us and be very open in what you need so that we can help and not just become another thing you have to do. So I could not be more excited for this to kick off. So thanks, Alex, for mentioning us.
Yeah, and thank you for joining. Presented here is kind of an overview of the fellowship timeline. If you were able to join the whole program kickoff, this should look a little bit familiar to you, but this kind of shows what to expect each month in the major components of the fellowship. You'll see that there's a lot of office hours and one-on-one meetings, and this kind of piggybacks off what Marshall was saying. We're not trying to just give you new systems and processes to push out what you're currently doing. We really want to build upon what current systems you're using in your district and really build upon those to say, what can we build on the system of how you're already collecting the data, sharing the data. How can we really expand on that and really inform and draw impact from that? So during each month, we'll always have a office hours, which is completely open. We want this to be a time for you to come ask questions of us, as well as really use this as a time to learn from and with your fellow data leads. So being able to understand what barriers and challenges they've faced and how they have overcome them. Being able to just have kind of a time to decompress with each other. We also each month will have a one-on-one coaching meeting, which some of you have already had your first March coaching call. During the month of May, however, we're going to have 2 separate coaching calls, one at the beginning of the month and one at the end of the month. This will be our only synchronous webinar together. Otherwise, the 2 additional webinar materials that you're going to receive are asynchronous, and they'll come out the 1st and 2nd week of April. And those are just webinars that you'll be able to watch anytime during that week on your own time. As for the objectives for today's meeting, we want you to leave with understanding the role that data plays in supporting CCM readiness. We also want to review best practices for collecting, managing, and documenting data. And altogether, we really want you to feel prepared to begin collecting, cleaning, and documenting your own CCMR data. So the first section that we're going to cover today is around college, career, and military readiness altogether, and then data and the role that it plays with that. So this slide will probably look a little bit familiar to most of you, but before talking about what data we need to collect, we really need to define the elements of what makes a student CCM ready in accountability and in outcomes bonus calculations. And this visual breaks it up really nicely because it compares it from the accountability standpoint versus outcomes bonus, and then what that means for being college ready, career ready, and military ready. So CCMR in accountability defines a student as college ready if they meet the Texas Success Initiative, TSA, criteria, or earn a dual course credit, or meet the criteria on an AP or IB exam, or an associate's degree, or if they qualify for the on-ramps course credit. In the outcomes bonus, it defines a student as college ready if they earn an associate's degree or meet TSI criteria, and they enroll in post-secondary educational institution immediately following high school graduation. As for career readiness, a student is defined as ready and accountability if they earn an industry-based certification or graduate with a completed IEP in workforce readiness, or they graduate with an advanced diploma plan and they received special education services, or they earned a level 1 or level 2 certificate. For the outcomes bonus, a student is considered career ready if they meet TSA criteria and they earn an IBC or a level 1 or level 2 certificate. And then for both accountability and outcomes bonus, a student is considered military ready if they enlist in the U.S. Armed Forces or Texas National Guard. So in addition to telling us what defines a CCM ready student, this slide also helps us begin to identify the data that we will need to collect and present in order to better predict our district's outcome bonuses, because it really identifies those high-level indicators. Another important point to emphasize is that this data is lagging data when it's published. So for example, as presented here, graduates from spring 2019 were included in the 2020 accountability data, so it lags by 1 year, and 2020-21 opportunity bonus summary of finance report, lagging 2 years. So this really emphasizes the importance of your position as a data lead in helping collect and present CCMR data to better predict what your district's opportunity bonus will be in real time, rather than having to wait those full 2 years. CCMR bonuses are paid for each annual graduate above a certain threshold percentage. So it's also broken down for each CCM Ready EcoDis annual graduate, non-EcoDis, and special education graduate. And there's a certain dollar amount for each. The earned funding can be used to support college and career advising, to support or establish and maintain college and career readiness school models, and to support teacher and student preparation. This slide kind of shows an overview of how to calculate it. And these are some examples of what we'll be working with you to help calculate, to be able to estimate your total CCMR outcomes bonus potential. Presented here are some common acronyms that you may come across while reviewing CCMR materials and data. So we want to just keep them in one common place for you to be able to reference. We know within the education realm, there are an abundance of acronyms. So have some common ones right here that we may be referencing throughout today's session as well as future sessions. The next two slides are going to present an overview of the CCMR indicators that we defined earlier on in that slide, and it aligns them to existing data sources. So this first slide presents the data that we collect through TSDS PEAMS reports. This includes the industry-based certification data, IBC, whether a student has earned an associate's degree in high school, and whether a student completed a dual credit course. So this has the specific indicator as well as the specific name of the report where you can download it. And you can download this historic data through the Texas State Data System. This second slide presents the data that we will collect through non-TSDS PEAMS reports. And this includes whether a student is currently meeting the opportunity bonus criteria, which is available on the CCMR tracker that is accessed through your Teal account, FAFSA and application completion counts available through Apply Texas Counselor Report, GSI readiness data accessed through AccuPlacer College Board, direct to college enrollment data, which is available at texashighereddata.org. And then lastly, military enlistment data, which is submitted by students. So these are the different kind of breakdowns of all of the high level indicators that we are going to be looking at and where you can access this data. So we'll be working together during this call, kind of talking through again, how to be pulling this data. And then during the coaching calls, going through and making sure that you're able to access all this data as the first step in being able to then analyze it and disseminate it to your CCMR committee to then make future decisions.
Alex, I might just jump in there, and with the 40 districts that we've had prior, what we've realized is probably one of the greatest indicators of achieving a bonus. Like, you know, we'll start working with a rural district and they're getting $0 of CCMR bonus. And one of the biggest first steps, I mean, obviously instructional quality and all of these, but there's some really low-hanging fruit around districts. The House Bill 3 funding formula and the way all of it works is just confusing. It's not very user-friendly and it's difficult to navigate. It's not aligned with accountability. So, you know, they try to make it as easy as possible for all of you. But one of the things that we found was really important was the districts that achieved an increase in their bonus are the ones that kept a solid record of which students have achieved what, and they could talk about their students by name. Sarah is TSI compliant, but she does not have a certification yet, and she does not intend to go to college. So we've got to get her certification. And then that even gets down to, you know, these are the files that you need to be able to navigate and clean and align for districts to really understand how they're performing. And, you know, your bonus shouldn't be a surprise. You should know exactly what your bonus would be. but almost 100% of our districts don't really know what their bonus is going to be. It's like a surprise. So these are the files that you need to know how to work with so that you can be in control and you have the power of knowledge to know where you're at and where you can improve. And so that's why these files are all so important, is learning to navigate these puts you kind of in the power seat.
Yeah, thank you, Marshall. Before we move on to the next section where we really get into best practices for collecting, managing, and documenting data, does anyone have any questions about the kind of overall CCMR program or your role as a data lead? Well, if anything comes up, either one of us will be managing the chat as well. So feel free to put something in the chat or bring it up at the end as well.
Awesome. I'm going to take us through this section. Many of you are probably already collecting, managing, and documenting data. So as Alex and Marshall have mentioned, we want to kind of just build on your practices and see for you which of these is going to help kind of accelerate and make it possible to come to all those meetings next year with your coach and say, yes, I know exactly where Sarah is. When we work with data, this is really the large bulk of the work that takes up so much time. And so we want to make sure that we have kind of a common vocabulary and then some best practices for getting through these topics together so that they're not taking up all your time and you can be focused more on students. So the first steps here, we're just going to set some foundational vocabulary really. So when we talk about the different files that we pull from many different places, we can navigate them together remotely. So you're probably familiar with the idea of a column in a spreadsheet representing one piece of information. We might call this different things like a variable, a field, or an attribute. So columns make up the vertical components of spreadsheets and rows are the horizontal. And they're a collection of column values. And that's can also be called a record or a case. And the differences between rows and columns will become particularly important as we look at different data set structures, as we look at visualizing data, and how we can visualize it based on how our spreadsheet is set up. We call a collection of rows and columns a table or a relation or a file, kind of depending on different programs that you might be working in. And cells are each individual data point. So we wanted to make sure we're all kind of on the same page with these different ideas before we go into types of data. So again, these really become important as we merge different data sources together, as we start to visualize data. What we're able to do with different columns of data depends on the type of data within it. So numeric is very readily understandable. A numeric value is any number. A date could be a date or a time. A text value is some string. So like names are a great example there. And then Boolean data types are true or false. And we'll often look at those as yes or no's, as ones or zeros. Is the student TSI ready or not? Yes or no. That's what we use with Boolean. So understanding which data type we're using and which we're getting from different files is really important in how quickly we can process data. Something that we see a lot is different types of student ID formatting. So we'll see some student IDs written, saved as a numeric value and others saved as a text or string value. And when you're trying to merge data sources, that can confound your efforts if you're not working with the same type of data. So being aware of all of these different features can help us more quickly process through and manage our data. Another kind of foundational concept we want to talk about that will again come into play as we start to think about merging data sources and visualizing them is data set structure. So most of us are probably most familiar with wide format. This is a student tracker where each student's in a row and you track their information across. So each student is represented one time in that first column, and then they have different attributes along the way. And this is generally set up really well for how humans think, right? We like a table like this. It makes sense to us. We can do quick calculations across. When it comes to machines processing our data or uploading it to different visualizations or combining, we sometimes prefer the long formats. So this contains values that do repeat in the first column. So in the example here, we have, I think, some tutoring sessions. And each session is represented multiple times because each session has different variables that go along with it and values for those variables. And you start saying a lot of V words, they get very tricky. But just kind of keep this in the back of your mind as we head forward, because we'll be talking about these in the next month or so as we move forward. Any quick questions on those kind of foundational terms before we talk about collecting data? Okay, let's do it. So as Marshall and Alex mentioned, we're going to be bringing together a lot of different data sources. We want to check that they are that all our data is showing up correctly when we collect it. And it's really helpful for us in just that table we saw, kind of bringing together information about the data sources. So we know when things are available, we know who has access to it, if something's sensitive and should be maybe like shut down in terms of access a little bit more. So to do that, we have created a template for a data inventory. So if you go to the next slide, Alex, we use this tool to kind of document what data are available and when. So it'll include a description of the data source. So maybe it's the PINS report, how you get it, you pull it from a site, how it's used and where to access it. And as you have an increasing number of data sources and you're trying to remember what's available when, who has access to particular things, who need to contact ahead of time to pull the data sources, this can be a really helpful tool for you and kind of organizing your thoughts. Again, not something you have to use, but something we're putting out as a resource for you all. We've also found in working with districts that it's a really helpful communication tool as folks come to you and want to know when things are available or why we can't answer a particular question. Having the inventory available to share with them or just kind of open access within your team can be really a proactive tool for communication there. And it really just helps build this idea of a data culture, which we talk about a lot as all folks kind of valuing and knowing how to use data. So the more transparent we can be with the information we have, the more helpful it is.
And just wanted to talk about really quick that this template and the one that was shared in the chat, it's also linked in the slide deck as well. And the slide deck was shared on Friday. It's linked in the workbook that was shared, but I will also send this out after this call so you all can print this out or just take your notes on this specific slide deck as well. But this template that is linked is specific for CCMR data. You can feel free to update it to reflect your, if you're want to get an inventory of all the different data that your district collects, which is a lot. But we wanted to kind of pinpoint the specific indicators that we went over first in those first couple slides. And that's what's outlined here in that first column. So having the industry-based certification of going through and saying who is this data about? Where do I access it? when is it accessed? How is it cleaned? So this is a really good starting point before you go in and start just pulling all the data, really taking inventory, making sure you understand what each of these data sets are telling you, and then also what work needs to be done when you do pull them. So this is a really great kind of grounding practice, because it can feel super overwhelming when you're like, I need to find all of this data, don't know where it is. This really helps kind of streamline these processes. And it's also great for documenting it, because maybe you'll come back next year at the same time. And when I worked in the district, I know this happened to me, and I was like, I know I've pulled this, I know where it is, but I forgot because it's been a year. So being able to document this and have all of these processes in one place will really streamline your work as a data lead as well.
Yeah, I like how you called it a grounding practice, Alex, because I think a lot of what we're talking about in the content today is really kind of deliberately slowing down and reviewing what we have and understanding it, with the idea of kind of going slow to go fast. The better we understand and are clear on what we have and the quality of it, the more quickly we can move on the other end of really digging into the data, because we know that the quality is there and that it's complete. So once we've collected our data, done our grounding step of understanding what we have, it's also important to think about cleaning the data and storing the data. So cleaning data, a lot of our sources are kind of state sources. They might be a little cleaner than something you pull from a district tracker system. But it's never good to make assumptions on that front. So we always want to be kind of running through some basic checks and cleaning our data. And you can kind of think about cleaning data as cataloging your books through the Dewey Decimal System, right? That gives us a very clear format and like structure to organize books. And we've created a cleaning data checklist that helps provide the same sort of structure here, so that you can be assured that we're not missing really vital pieces. And cleaning data is really kind of the foundation of your house. So if you hop to the next slide, Alex. Cleaning data is just the process of fixing or removing incorrect, corrupted, incorrectly formatted, duplicate, or incomplete data within a data set. So incorrectly formatted, we talked about those different types of data, and maybe making sure that all your student IDs are saved as a number rather than a string value. Making sure that we don't have two students listed twice. Making sure that all of a student's data is available within a data set. And because we have so many different data sources here, there's a lot of opportunity to introduce error into the data sets when we're combining them. And then it's kind of that idea of garbage in, garbage out. If we don't start with a strong foundation, we're not going to be able to have a valid and reliable source of data to track progress over the course of next year, and make sure that we really understand where we are at with CCMR outcomes bonus. So we're really working on the foundation, that grounding idea.
It's nice to have the coaching team and the data team, because again, like, here's what happens. We get your testing center, or maybe you're a testing site, and they send you your TSI scores. Well, that comes in its own document. And then you download, maybe your counselor has a form with every kid and their CCMR tracking. Like, every school we work with has this elaborate Google sheet where someone's tracking things. And then there's another file that comes that has the scores from, some other, ACT, right? And so we get all these things, and they're messy and they're hard to combine. But the skills that we noticed with Jen and Alex and NAFCI is they can very quickly, there are some really pretty easy ways to just align around ID, and you can put all those documents into one document and they align themselves by a common ID. And for me, it was mind blowing. I'm a past principal. So I used to think about all the days I tried to align all these IDs, and then Jen and Alex have these systems that you can align by IDs and populate one document. So it starts to be really helpful for your team and brings about a lot of efficiency when you don't have to hand enter, and you can learn how to merge documents around an ID. It's really helpful, especially in CCMR where sources are coming from all over the place.
Yeah, thanks, Marshall. That's a great call out. When we get to the idea of using formulas and merging spreadsheets, they don't merge unless the IDs are right. And so that's where cleaning the data becomes important, because it just saves so many kind of slips down the line. So as I mentioned, we have a checklist, which Alex also shared, I believe. And there it is in the chat. Kind of a basic data cleaning checklist that isn't, we don't think, but let us know, we don't think it's super overwhelming. It's kind of hitting the big major pieces that you want to hit though as you're cleaning a data spreadsheet. And the call out here is step 1 is saving your original file. We always like to save an original file and a cleaned file, because we're all humans and we all make mistakes. And sometimes in cleaning, you make a mistake and you get to the end, you're like, doesn't quite add up. So we have to go back to the original to check where we might have gone wrong. So that is definitely step number 1, save your original file. Step 1 after that is to make sure that your columns are labeled correctly. Particularly as you're merging multiple data sources. Maybe we're looking over multiple years to kind of do some historical analysis. We want to make sure that we're being really consistent within a data set and across data sources. So in the example we highlight here, one of these map score columns is labeled with the full year and one's labeled with the half year. Making sure we're all aligned on how we label academic years. Just little things like this that really add up over time and make you lose the clarity behind the column name and what you're working with. For some programs, you might also have a technical requirement of like no spaces, but just going through and reviewing your columns, making sure you understand what each is for, and that they're labeled consistently. Step 2, are there duplicate cases? You know how many students you should have. Is this the right number? Do we have multiple students? Here, this student, Gianna Brown, is listed twice, but one of her rows is missing data. And again, these might be things that you already do in practice, but having the full checklist to walk through can be really helpful in making sure that we're not skipping any steps, or we just have that satisfaction and confidence in knowing that we're creating a very clean and high quality data set. Step 3 is a little bit, takes a little bit more time sometimes. Here we're asking if there are data that are out of range or unusual. So here this might be a TSI score that's listed but doesn't actually exist as a TSI score. If you said you scored 70,500, and Kathy and Marshall fact check me on TSI scores, but we want things to be appropriately within range. So in the example here too, we're breaking students down by race, ethnicity. Some students have W for white, some have WH for white. So we want to make sure that those are combined into one category for white students rather than 2. Otherwise, we're going to see skewed results. And we also want to be thinking about how we're marking data that's null or missing. So sometimes we might use places might use 999. You want to be aware of what that null marker is and make sure that it's consistent across your data columns. So here they changed it from a 999 to a null, just because it's easier to work with and easier to spot that that's a missing value. We also want to be thinking about logical relationships between different columns of data, and if they exist, do they make sense? So here we have a number of third grade students that are taking a test or receiving tutoring or something. And we just might want to check that this student's birth date is listed as 2010, while the others are 2011 and 2012. We might want to just confirm that the student is accurately listed as a third grader rather than a fourth grader. So things like this across your data set. And again, this really requires slowing down and reviewing holistically rather than just kind of merging the data and moving on. That's my theme for today. And then step 5, how do we handle missing data? So we talked about kind of using null, 999s or blanks, just making sure we're consistent there. If you have any columns with a large amount of missing data, thinking about whether you keep that column or remove it, or where you can get that data from. Are there any rows with large amounts of missing data that are going to throw off your set? So in this example here, a student is missing a number of tutoring pieces, so they're removed from the data set. Here, we don't want to remove students from your graduating class. So I think more likely than not, it'll be this third bullet point that's really important here, and just making sure that missing data are handled in the same way, kind of across the sets. And so we wanted to give you all an opportunity to kind of go through this in an example and practice cleaning a data set. So we've created an activity in the workbook here, which Alex posted in the chat along with the data set. And the overview is that your CCMR steering committee has asked you to create a dashboard displaying the number of students who met TSI readiness in math, ELAR, and in both subjects. And so you working from the data set will use the data cleaning checklist and clean the data so that it's ready to create a dashboard. Alex, any instructions that I'm forgetting?
No, I shared both the workbook as well as the data set. The workbook, if you open it up, which I saw a couple people are in it right now, the actual case study itself will start on page 3, and then on page 2 is where the webinar resources are linked. So under general, there's the slide deck linked. We'll also, once we have the recording, we'll link it right in here. The case study materials. So there's the case study data set that was shared in this chat, but it's also linked right here, as well as the example data dictionary that was completed for this case study. Also, all the templates that we're sharing and referencing throughout the session are linked right here as well. So what you will go through and work on is starting on page 3. We know that this task, you probably won't be able to complete it because we're going to give you around 10 minutes, but we just want you to get a feel of kind of getting a data set and processing through using that data cleaning checklist. Again, any tool that we provide can be modified and adapted to best fit your needs. We're just kind of showing you what we've created and found useful for us. But if you're like, I already have this process that I use, that's great. We just want to really emphasize the importance of documenting these systems and processes so that they can be repeated and continuously used.
So we'll go to some individual work time until about 1:51.
Yep, that sounds great. And if anyone has any questions or you have trouble accessing any of those documents, just send us a chat.
Yep, we'll be here. All right, we're going to take about 1 more minute to wrap up. Right, we'd love to have 1 or 2 folks share just how the activity went, if this was something familiar to you or a new way of doing this, just kind of what your reflections were from the activity. Feel free to put in the chat or come off mute and share. I know myself personally, I really like having a checklist, particularly when making something that's a little more high stakes. It's nice to have that to come back and rely upon if folks have questions about the data or the process for arriving at the final data. It's nice to just have that documentation and validation. But yeah, curious what folks think. Yes, find and replace. That's a very helpful button. Helps with step 7 to 9. Thanks, Vanessa. There are lots of quick shortcuts to help you quicken up this process in Excel. So I think those skills too we can work on throughout our time together, but definitely very helpful.
One thing I just like, I have a data set very similar to this that's very real for a current district, and just knowing, you know, so often we just put data in for our own tracking, but we are tracking it in a really kind of old, like analog way. Like I just need to like be able to see it. And so it's very realistic to have all these like inaccuracies, and it's made, you know, this exact type of thing has made it difficult to merge documents because they're not formatted the same, or there's missing values, or so this was one of the big things I feel like we learned in collecting data the last time is, if you start to get into a culture of everyone in your organization just keeping the data clean, it's like just keeping your, you know, house organized. Everything is much easier because you can always merge. So it's interesting just looking at the data set. I was helping a district. This cleanliness is really helpful, or a barrier when it comes to merging. Does anybody in the group, what do you do when you don't have data? Like if you have a student who doesn't have a score right now, is there anybody that, do you just leave it empty, or do you 99 it? Or how do you handle when a student is supposed to have a score, but the information is empty? This happens a lot in all the data sets I've been looking at.
Yeah, especially in the TSI data where it'll be specific to like the math test or the reading test or the writing.
I think that's one of the questions I had as I was going through this cleaning list. You know, how we're saying to delete some of them, but some of them had the ELA or the reading, or didn't have the math, and you know which one to choose. So I was like leaving them all. I started realizing. And then what we do is we do another column and we put comments just to have comments. But then again, that's difficult because you can't really pull data from comments since they're all different.
Yeah, that's a great point, like keeping comments. And I think that ties to like keeping the original data file. So it's almost like you could comments in the original data file if you have those instances, and like document the decisions you made. Like, okay, maybe I'm going to combine these 2 rows for this kiddo, or like maybe I'm going to delete this one because I know they have a more recent score or something. But you have that comment field to really provide context for the decisions you made, so you can always go back if there's questions about them.
And it's interesting because Alex, Nafki, and Jen are also doing data fellows for TEA. So they're working with all kinds of districts in the RSSP 1A and 1A and 1B. And there are some really easy ways to visualize your data and create a dashboard. And everyone thinks that that's incredibly difficult. But Jen and Alex and Nafki have helped districts just like you take their own data source that's just a big tab, like a big Excel sheet or Google sheet, and turn it into a visualization that your whole team can look at. And it's really not that difficult, and you can do it with some free software that's out there. But you've also got to start to think ahead. If you want to start kind of going to the next step of visualizing your data, if it's not clean, when you put it into a visualization software and it just has a missing value, the data visualization software will do weird things with it. It won't see it as a number, or it'll see it as a 0. And you'll start to find that your charts don't match what you believe should be happening. So that's another part that a lot of times, if you're not visualizing your data, you don't think through that. But at the end of this fellowship, the goal is you could jump into Google Data Suite and take your chart and turn it into a quick visualization for a staff meeting. And so the cleanliness is important for that.
So I wanted to just quickly share my screen and just kind of show some like high level overviews of things that we noticed in the data set as we worked through the data cleaning checklist, and just see if you guys notice similar things. If you have any feedback of like, oh yes, see this a lot in data, feel free to chime in. But wanted to kind of create a data set that is presenting the TSI data, which is one indicator that you all will be looking at. Wanted to show this because they are data sets that have multiple students listed more than once. As get who said it, mentioned it earlier, but it's different because you can't just delete those entries who aren't fully filled out because they're showing for specific tests. So it's kind of a different approach to it, because a lot of times if we had data like this, it would be like, well, this student only has 1 score. Do we look at it? Like, we're being able to look at it with fidelity, but in this instance, it's important that we keep all the data. So kind of in working through the steps and seeing the data, the first step that we always recommend is creating a data dictionary. I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides, but the data dictionary is really data set specific, and it's an inventory of all the data elements that are in your data set. So it details like a description of what the data means, what the format of the data is, the source of the data, and then how you use it. So it's a really important tool to keep, and a tool that I will use like when I start a new data set, just kind of create a data dictionary. It really is a dictionary for you to reference and say, what does this variable mean? Especially when you're getting really long data sets, like when you're pulling it from AccuPlacer maybe, and there's a lot of different variables and they're not clearly labeled. It'll just be like especially if you're looking at like a TEKS, it'll just be like letters and a couple numbers. Like, what does that mean? Having the data dictionary allows you to just quickly reference and say, oh yeah, that's what this variable means. And this is the format that it should be in order for me to visualize this in my platform. So that's just another best practice, and we will share out a template of that. The next step is looking at and making sure that all the headers make sense. So if we had multiple years of this data, then I would want to make sure that each of these column headers were presented the same way. So for instance, if I had like 2019 and 2020 data, and I was doing them to compare them historically, then I would want to make sure it was consistently like TSI reading placement. Maybe I'd like to do underscores underscore 2019. And then if I had the same thing for 2020, making sure that it's the exact same thing, but then just updating the date to say 2020. Because these are pretty simple headers, they were all correct. So we didn't really need to do anything with that. The next step was to look at the number of cases or rows of data. So you want to be sure that there are the correct number, not too many, not too few. So you may notice, as discussed, that there were multiple students who were listed more than once. If you were pulling like enrollment data or like registrar data, that would be a big flag, and you would want to be able to check those duplicates and make sure where those discrepancies are occurring. But because this TSI data is showing a different value, because they're showing a specific different score for a different test for each student, then it makes sense that there are different values. But there was, if you dig into the data, seeing that there's the different entries for each separate TSIA test. And the only student with an actual repeated entry is Ava Garcia. So if I was looking and I noticed and I see Ava Garcia right here, and it shows TSI Math 956, and it was taken on April 24th. I also see her listed here. It's the same name, same student ID, same score, and same date. So that's a duplicate. So then what I would do is go and delete the score. And then in my data dictionary, in the data cleaning tab, which I'll show you, I would just document that Ava Garcia had a duplicate recording. So her second listing was removed. Just so then I can understand and kind of translate from my original file to my clean file what changes were made. So I can kind of just, if I wanted to go and repeat those steps, or if someone was like checking my work, or to back up your work and say, yes, these files are different, but this is why. Step 5 has you look at out of range or unusual cases. So in reviewing the data, you're seeing all these different TSI scores, but you might have noticed that as you scroll down that, let's see, Hudson Brown, he had a really, really high score. Like that's not a possible TSI score. So I would flag this and follow up and look in either AccuPlacer, College Board, or if like in your SIS to verify what the correct score is. Because for some reason, maybe like someone's student ID got incorrectly copied into that value, but obviously that isn't an inaccurate value. I also know this because I can reference my data dictionary, which will tell me all viable values that can be listed. And since this falls out of range, I know this isn't a correct value. So again, I would flag this. Usually I would either add a comment or turn it red, change the font to red, and then follow up in either AccuPlace or College Board, or where another, like the main data source was for this. Moving to step 6 is you're looking for values that don't make sense as part of a logical relationship. So a lot of times when I'm pulling like enrollment data or testing data where it includes both a student's grade and their date of birth, that's a good place to like, if there was one student who they're all in 3rd grade and they were all born in, I don't even know what year that would be born in. What year would that be, John? Marshall, do you have a kid in 3rd grade?
I'm preschool right now.
I know.
2013.
Thank you. I was gonna say 2006, so I would have been way off. So all the students are born in.
Actually, it's 2014.
Okay.
14-ish, yes.
Okay. Well, if all the students say they're in 3rd grade, they're all born in 2013, 2014, but then you won't see one student who's like 2007. That could be a flag and be like, I should follow up and check in my student information system to verify that the student's date of birth is either correct or incorrect, or the grade is correct or incorrect. So that's a common logical relationship that we'll look at. In this data set, a common or a logical relationship, or just something that wouldn't make sense, is kind of the test start date. because we identified like a specific range of dates that we wanted to look at the testing data for when we pulled the data, we want to make sure that all the data is from that period. So if I'm just kind of casually looking through and I'm seeing everything's 2020, there were some 2019s, which that's what's fine, that was in my range. But I see that Stella Garza, it says that she took the test on February 6th in 1920. Obviously, I would flag that because she did not take it in 1920. I would assume that that would be just an incorrect data entry error and that it was supposed to be 2020. But again, I would flag this and follow up in either College Board or AccuPlacer to verify that I have the correct data point. Some other pieces as well in the testing data that I see that stand out around data formatting is that this is formatted as a text rather than in that consistent date format. So this is another piece that I would want to change. And this is really important when you're uploading it into your visualization platform, because it's not going to read these values as the same as January 15th, 2020. They have to be formatted in a similar way. So they should all be formatted as that date value. And then the final 3 steps are really just looking at missing data and documenting how you're going to handle it. And that's something that is really important to document in your data dictionary so that someone can go in and not have one of those common instances where, oh, if they have missing data, does that mean they had like a 0 that they didn't show up, for instance? No, it just means that that value isn't available for them. So being really clear around what a blank value actually is. So in looking in here, I can see that missing data is handled in a variety of ways. And these all 3 are kind of common ways that we see. So there's blank cells, there's null values, and then there's also not available. Some other common things that we see are 9999, and that is kind of another common value. But what I would want to do is decide, how do I want to indicate blank values, or just where no data is. And then because the majority are indicating this by just having a blank cell, then I decide to do that as a blank cell. So then I would just go through, do the find and replace as someone commented, and replace the nulls and the not availables with just a blank cell. And then I would document in my data dictionary that missing data is just handled by a blank cell. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. So the last step, as I mentioned, is looking at your data dictionary, making sure that you documented all these steps, and then really importantly, resaving your file so that it's saved under a cleaned title. So then you always will have your original file as well as your cleaned file. I'm also going to quickly show what the end result for the data dictionary looks like, so you can see what I was referencing. All right, so here's an example data dictionary for that specific case study. And this just kind of shows you what a data dictionary looks like. Sometimes if you have a really long file with a ton of columns, it can be really long. But because we only had, how many columns? We only had 7 columns. There's only 7 in this dictionary. So I have the name of the table, which was Data Leads Case Study Data Set. Then I copy over the column name for each column in there. So there was last name, first name, student ID, the reading placement, writer placer, and then mathematics score, and then the test start date. Then this column gets into kind of more specifics about that data. So what was the data type? First and last name were text columns. The student ID was numeric, along with all of the TSI scores. And then that test start was a date format. And this is, we had talked about the different types of data earlier in this session, but it's really important to record and document this and think about how you're saving it, because it has a huge impact on how you can visualize your data. Because if something is set as a text, then you're not going to be able to do any like descriptive statistics on it. Obviously, you're not going to do any descriptive statistics on a last name, but if you accidentally had formatted your reading placement scores as text, you wouldn't be able to run any of those statistics. And then the next column shows all possible values. So this is something that comes in handy when you're going through and making sure that all the values make sense. So with first and last name, I know it's open-ended. It can be a variety of different names. Student ID, same thing, just kind of the range that they should fall in. And then with the scores, that they should be between 910 and 990, and the writing score being between 1 and 5. So that's how I knew that one outrageous score that was like 15,000 was not a viable score. And then also with the test start date, that I was only pulling data that was presented for 2019 through 2020. So this just really helps you validate your clean data set.
Marshall also dropped in the chat a place where you'll see data dictionary show up, and that's with a lot of TEA downloads. They'll provide a data dictionary because their column header names are basically gobbledygook. So you need to really translate those. So that's another way that you see these pop up.
Awesome, thank you. So again, this last two are showing how a missing value will be denoted. So just that the cell will be left blank, and then just a description of the variable. So a lot of times, like I said, they get very convoluted. Like when Jen was saying, especially from TEA, having the data dictionary is so helpful because you can actually remember what that variable stands for. We also have the separate tab, which are the data cleaning rules. So being able to document if there are any like random missing variables, the cell is left blank. Variables with a high degree of missing data, they're left as is, because we know that each row is only showing testing data for one student, so we can expect to have a lot of missing data. However, if there are individual cases with a high degree of missing data, so if they're missing all testing data and they don't have like a testing date, we can exclude them because they don't provide any valuable information for the data set. But this is where you can document all of this. And we always make one specific for each project or just each data set. I'll go back to the slideshow now. So any questions as we kind of went through those high level points of what to look for when you're cleaning the data?
No questions, but I do believe the activity helped us go, and check what we're trying to do. That's right.
Awesome, great. And the kind of correct steps to walk through are presented on page 4 and 5. So if you want to walk through it again, you can kind of go through and see it step by step and kind of what the end product should look like based on those data cleaning steps.
I apologize. I do have one question on the data dictionary. Will that be a separate? We're going to be saving it separately, or that will be saved with the data set?
I usually save it with the data set. So when I start a new project, and this kind of gets into best practices for data storage and sharing, is making a folder for that data. And I include like the original file, the cleaned file, and then a data dictionary. So then if anyone wants to go in and see that data file, they can click on the data dictionary and understand and interpret it.
And it's interesting because what happens in the accelerator is you have, or in districts, you have the counselor having one-on-one meetings with all the students and going in and putting, yes, I met. And then you have like a testing coordinator putting in like numbers of TSI exams. And then you have a teacher that goes in and looks and says, actually, this student is in, just finished algebra 2. So you have a lot of people in one file, and you should. A district where only the administrator is looking at data that's such a missed opportunity, right? Everyone should be looking at this data, but the data dictionary helps. If you get consistent, like tab 1 is the data, tab 2 is the data dictionary, everyone can look at that and say, what do I do for missing data? I forget. And by the way, if your people are having that conversation where they're like, what do I do with missing data? You know that you've increased the capacity of your staff to handle data. And the better you get with that, it just builds on itself. And Maya's big, like what we always talk about is at Maya, we don't have a product to sell. Like we don't have some software to sell you or anything like that. So like what we believe is the software will come and go. You know that. There will be a new software every year. Something will come, there will be a new something. You're going to, buy a new thing to help you. There's going to be a new student information system. In this program, for example, you'll have a CCMR tracker through CareerCraft that you can use. We suggest you do. But as all of that comes and goes, if you don't have data literacy and data capacity, all of those tools are just going to be frustrating. Because like even the CCMR tracker, if you don't clean the files and put them into the machine the right way, then the machine doesn't work. So our philosophy is the more you can build the capacity of your people from every level of the organization at the school to understand this level of data literacy, then whatever tool comes and goes, you can navigate the tool well. And it just saves you a lot of frustration.
I agree that's like such an important component of what we're hoping to share with you all over the next few months is things that will last beyond this program, beyond any kind of tool that comes and goes. These really are kind of like best practices, no matter when you're working with data. So kind of just to wrap up storage and sharing, we've mentioned saving a copy of the original file, having autosave turned on, or kind of continually saving your file. And then having naming conventions that really work for you and are clear over time, and maybe even, for others using the files as well. Dates of files, like, is this draft, is this final, etc., things like that. And then as always within K-12, being so careful with data sharing, making sure that we're sharing via the share file link once we have that DSA up in place, and just being very careful in how we're transferring student data.
All right, the last section that we're covering is going to kind of cover topics we already covered, but it's around documenting data. And we're just going to share 3 templates that we find incredibly helpful in our work. 2 of them we already covered, 1 will be new. So this first one is the data inventory. So as discussed earlier, the data inventory is a tool to document what data are available across your district as it relates to CCMR. So it includes a description of each data source, how each is collected, how the data are used as it pertains to CCMR, and where to access the data. And this is a really important first step in getting the lay of the CCMR data land at your district. We could fill this out and share it with districts, but it wouldn't be the same for each district. So it's really important for you to dive in and say, where do I get the IBC data? We know who the data are about, but who collects it, where is it stored, and when can I have access to it? So we really want to urge you to look at this template and start filling it out for your district. It should remind you of some of the conversations that you're having in your March coaching call, as we're talking about what data do you have access to, kind of rating your level or ease of being able to access it so that we can really understand where we can support in those specific data polls. But this will be a really important tool for you to begin to go through and identify how you within your district can collect each of these data sources. The next tool that we're mentioning is a newer one. And this is a data calendar. So this is also a project-wide tool, and it's used to document the key dates for when data are collected and when they're available for use. So a lot of times they come at different dates. So for example, in this first row, it shows map data. So we know that the data is collected like in September, but then maybe it's not even ready to be cleaned for another month after that. And then it can be analyzed, especially with like state assessment data, when it takes so long for it to be gone through the correct portals and made sure that everything is correct in terms of the data that's being presented. Sometimes it's spring testing, but then the data itself isn't even available until the next fall. So really documenting this is important because it helps you understand and be able to plan out your work, and also helps with that communication piece and increasing others' understanding of, even though the data was already collected, it's not available to be used yet. And also emphasizing the importance of cleaning data by including that as a specific check mark in here. I think one piece that is often underestimated, and one thing we've learned with another group of data fellows that we're working with, is the amount of time and work data cleaning takes and how much it's underestimated. A lot of times people will get like data requests and say, hey, can you put this into a dashboard for me? And they think it can be a quick turnaround. When really a lot of time needs to be taken to ensure that that data is clean. So it's not just going to produce trash. As Jen said earlier, if the data isn't clean and it's not showing correct information, then it really is garbage in, garbage out, and you're not going to be able to be making accurate decisions based off that. And then this last one is the data dictionary, which is what we walked through in that case study. This is a specific tool that includes for each data variable, the data type, definition, all possible values, and then how to handle missing data. It's almost like a user guide for a data set, and it's incredibly important for documenting your work and ensuring consistency in future data preparation and cleanings. Any questions about those templates and those tools? And those are all linked within both the slide deck as well as in the workbook as well. So as for next steps, we really want you to work through the template data inventory and identify for each CCMR indicator how to access each data source in your district. So really think through, if it's something that you don't know, then flag it, and we can kind of work through and troubleshoot that together. But really working through that, speaking with others on maybe the CCMR committee, just getting a better understanding of what data you'll be able to access and how you access it, so we can start to really pull all those different data points. And then as second and third steps, if you're feeling up for it, beginning to download the outline data. Maybe you're like, I am a whiz with TSI data, I'm a whiz with IBC data. Then start pulling it and start kind of working through the downloaded data and cleaning it using those, the data cleaning checklist, and documenting it using the data dictionary. But really, we think the first one that you really want to prioritize is kind of putting together your data inventory, and then be able to share that during your coaching call and saying like, these are the data points that I'm really confident in, and these are the ones that I still need to understand how to access and how to pull. As for what's coming up as the data fellowship, you will either already have had or will have in the next 2 weeks your March one-on-one coaching session. During this time, it's really your time to ask us questions about the fellowship, for us to get to know your district and your role, and understand any processes that are already in place regarding CCMR data, so that we can really build to support the work that's already being done. We're also going to kind of gauge how you're able to access the current data as we talked about, and that's why that data inventory will be a helpful discussion point as well. But if you're not able to have it finished by your call, no worries, because we can kind of talk through that as a team. As I mentioned earlier as well, we'll have April asynchronous sessions. So it'll be kind of similar to the information format of information delivery today, but instead of being synchronous, it'll be asynchronous. And those will be published on April 3rd and April 10th. Any questions about next steps and what's coming up? Nope. Oops. Well, that is the end of today's session. We always ask that you complete a really brief exit ticket. Jen, do you mind putting it in the chat? The exit ticket is really for us to gauge kind of how the session went. Let us know if you feel as though the learning objectives were met, how you think it could be improved. If you have any follow-up questions, just providing us honest feedback so that we can really be improving the services and resources that we're providing you. Otherwise, we are all set. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be hanging around here for another 4 minutes. So if you want to just talk with us, say hi, or you have specific questions, feel free to hang around. Otherwise, you are all set, and thank you again.
Thank you, guys. We're excited to have the next cohort on board. It's awesome. Make sure you guys boss us around. If this isn't relevant, boss us around. Tell us, this is what I'm doing and I need you to help me, and we'll help you. We can file, we can type, we can transcribe, we can staple. So make sure you guys are telling us what you need. That's our goal.